The man approached the front desk and specifically requested to stay in room 1408. The receptionist quickly called the manager over. The manager suggested he choose another room, but Carl refused, insisting on staying in 1408. With no other option, the manager invited Carl into his office. After a serious attempt to dissuade him, Carl still wouldn't budge. The manager reluctantly pulled out a notebook. When Carl opened it, he found it recorded the deaths of 56 people who had stayed in room 1408. The earliest case dated all the way back to 1912, during the first week the hotel opened. Each page documented a different gruesome tragedy, and the manager explained that the unnatural deaths in this room were so disturbing that even the media refused to report on them. No one had ever managed to stay in the room for more than an hour. Once again, the manager pleaded with Carl to pick a different room, but Carl, being an atheist, saw this as the perfect material for his work. He told the manager that he was determined to stay in that room, warning that if they didn't let him, he would file a complaint. Seeing Carl's stubbornness, the manager had no choice but to agree. He retrieved the long-sealed key to 1408. After escorting Carl to the 14th floor, the manager stayed in the elevator, still hoping Carl would change his mind. But Carl simply told him, "See you tomorrow," and the manager, resigned, closed the elevator doors. Carl made his way to room 1408, casually flipping through the notebook as he walked. A cleaning lady passed by without making a sound. Carl, absorbed in the notebook, continued wandering down the hall, but after walking for a while, he found himself back at the elevator. Confused, he put the notebook away and began searching for the room by checking the door numbers one by one. As he turned a corner, he saw a woman with a child and noticed that room 1408 was right next to her. He figured the manager's warnings were unfounded. Carefully, Carl unlocked the door and turned on the lights one by one. The room was brightly lit and looked perfectly normal. To be cautious, he thoroughly inspected the room. There was no one hiding in the bathroom. The TV had programs he liked, and aside from the overpriced minibar, there wasn't anything remotely terrifying. For those who were scared, the drawer even contained a Bible. Relieved, Carl wiped the sweat from his face in the bathroom and poked his head out to check the view outside. Everything seemed calm and ordinary, but just as he began to relax, music suddenly started playing inside the room. The man noticed that there were now two objects on the bed. As he got closer, he realized they were two chocolates, but just moments ago, there had been nothing there. Carl became convinced that someone had entered the room. He quickly flung open the wardrobe and yanked the shower curtain aside, but there was no one. Turning around, he saw that the toilet paper in the bathroom had been replaced with a fresh roll. This only reinforced his belief that someone had been in the room recently. Whoever it was had worked incredibly fast, and Carl was sure they were still there. He rushed into the living room, but again, no one. He checked another cabinet, but it was empty. Just then, Carl started to feel hotter. Realizing the air conditioning had stopped working, he called the front desk and requested a repair. Strangely, the first thing the receptionist said was to urge him to check out immediately. Though Carl refused, a chill ran down his spine. Grabbing a UV light, he scanned the room, revealing stains all over the walls, blood splatters everywhere. Confused, he quickly turned on the lights. At that moment, a painting in the living room fell off the wall. As Carl went to put it back in place, a sudden knock at the door startled him. He peered through the peephole and saw that it was the repairman. Standing at the threshold, the repairman refused to step inside, offering only to guide Carl remotely on how to fix the issue. Carl reluctantly followed the instructions and got the air conditioning working again. But when he turned around, the doorway was empty. The repairman had vanished. Carl shut the door, and suddenly the clock on his tape recorder began counting down. Startled, Carl felt like his ears were about to explode. He leaned out the window, desperate to hear anything, but there was only silence. Turning back to the room, the window slammed down on his hand, causing him to rush to the bathroom to rinse it off, but the water quickly turned scalding hot. It was clear that once the countdown started, the room had become more and more bizarre. Panicking, Carl picked up the phone to contact the front desk, but instead of a normal conversation, the voice on the other end was talking about various menu items, completely ignoring anything Carl said. Frustrated and unable to communicate, Carl decided it was time to leave. However, when he tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. One day, while giving her son a bath, the woman noticed something strange. His body had shrunk significantly. She quickly took the boy to the doorframe where she had marked his height, only to be shocked that he was now shorter than he had been 5 months ago. It was then that she realized the boy in front of her wasn't her son at all. Mary was a single mother raising her 9-year-old son. She worked as a supervisor at the local telephone exchange, and her job often required her to work late. Fortunately, her son had always been well-behaved and understanding. That day, Mary had promised to take her son to the movies, but due to a staffing shortage, she was called back to work for overtime. Although she didn't want to break her promise, her son reassured her that work was more important. As Mary stepped outside, she saw her son waving goodbye to her through the window, completely unaware that this would be their final farewell. When she returned home after her shift, her son was nowhere to be found. She called out for him, but there was no answer. A deep sense of dread immediately washed over her. Mary hoped that her son had simply gone out to play with friends, but when she asked the neighborhood kids, they all said they hadn't seen him. Panicking, she contacted the police, but they informed her that they couldn't file a missing persons report until 24 hours had passed. She would have to wait until the next morning. Mary spent the night anxiously waiting, and as soon as daylight came, officers arrived to investigate. She placed all her hopes in the police, but the days turned into weeks, and soon 5 months had passed with no sign of her son. Mary tirelessly reached out to various investigation bureaus, inquiring about missing children. Then, finally, she received good news. The police had found traces of Jack, and he was still alive. Overwhelmed with joy, Mary rushed to the station. But when the boy stepped off the train and stood before her, she hesitated. She looked at him and said, "This is not my son." The woman's child had mysteriously disappeared, but when her son reappeared before her, she froze and said, "This is not my son." The police captain was in disbelief, assuming that Mary's overwhelming grief had caused her to become confused in the heat of the moment. But how could a mother not recognize her own child? With reporters swarming behind her and the captain pressuring her to save face for the police, Mary reluctantly went along with the plan. The boy was sent home with her. Soon, photos of Mary and this unfamiliar boy appeared on the front pages of newspapers, broadcasted by the media as a heartwarming reunion. However, after a few days of living with him, Mary couldn't ignore the glaring differences between this boy and her real son. His features didn't match her son's, and she could no longer bear the deception. She couldn't understand why this boy would lie to her and the police, but one thing was clear: she needed to find her real son. Determined, Mary returned to the police station, presenting the inconsistencies she had noticed about the boy. But instead of helping her, the captain's demeanor suddenly shifted. He insisted that the boy's identity had already been confirmed and publicized in the media, accusing Mary of being unreasonable. Despite her pleas, the captain refused to continue the search for her son. From his perspective, admitting a mistake would turn everything he had done into a public embarrassment. Mary couldn't comprehend why, after agreeing to take in the boy, she was now facing such resistance. Determined to prove that this was not her child, she decided to gather evidence. She took the boy to the dentist, knowing her real son had a gap in his front teeth, which this boy did not. Then, she brought him to school, where he failed to recognize the teacher, classmates, or even his own seat. Armed with this evidence, Mary returned to the police station and publicly revealed everything she had discovered. Feeling threatened, the captain resorted to extreme measures. He labeled Mary as a mentally unstable mother who didn't want her child. He then ordered his officers to take Mary to a local psychiatric hospital. A billionaire mysteriously died in a horrific car accident, and after his death, his entire fortune was left to his lazy, unmotivated son who spent his days wasting time. Meanwhile, his responsible and hardworking daughter, who had always been the apple of his eye, was left with nothing but a single key. Mary couldn't understand why, during his life, her father had clearly loved her the most. Yet, after his death, he left her with almost nothing. From her father's computer, she discovered a video message he had recorded for her. In the message, her father explained that there was a hidden basement in the hills near their home, and the key she received was meant to unlock the door. Inside, he said, was a secret he had spent his life protecting, and he implored her to guard it as well. Seizing a moment when no one was paying attention, Mary quietly made her way to the backyard. After unlocking a heavy iron door, she found herself staring at a long staircase leading downward. Summoning her courage, she decided to descend and figure out what was going on. After walking through a dark, narrow corridor, she came upon an old man who was imprisoned there. Terrified, Mary fled the scene and rushed back home. Still shaken, she picked up the phone to call the police, but then she remembered that her brother was currently running for a seat in Parliament. If the authorities found out that their family had been keeping someone locked up in the basement, it could ruin her brother's political career. At that moment, her brother approached her and asked if she was upset about how their father's inheritance had been divided. He offered to have all the family assets appraised and sold, so the two of them could split the proceeds equally. Mary hurriedly declined his offer. If someone came to evaluate the property, the secret in the basement would surely come to light. After much deliberation, Mary decided to investigate the matter herself. She took a gun from a drawer, gathered her courage, and returned to the basement. Worried that her face might be recognized, she wore a mask. However, the old man immediately told her it wasn't necessary. "I know who you are," he said. "If you've come here to find me, it means your father has passed away." Mary was stunned. This man not only knew everything about her family, but even described a birthmark on her body. It was clear that the relationship between her father and this man was far from ordinary. Mary asked why her father had imprisoned him here, but the truth turned out to be far more horrifying than she could have imagined. An old man had been imprisoned by another man for 30 years. Before the man died, he gave the key to the secret room to his daughter, asking her to keep this secret. The old man revealed the truth to Mary. His name was Jack, and 30 years ago, he and her father had been inseparable business partners. But during one business trip, Mary's father accidentally hit and killed someone with his car. Jack wanted to report the incident to the police, but Mary's father only wanted to dispose of the body. Ignoring Jack's objections, he quickly found an empty empty plot of land and buried the corpse, fearing that Jack might report him. Mary's father knocked him unconscious and locked him in the basement, where he remained imprisoned for 30 years. After hearing Jack's story, Mary was furious and insulted him, refusing to believe him. Her father had always been a good and honest man in her eyes. To convince her, Jack revealed that her father had been keeping a mistress. He even gave Mary the address. Determined to uncover the truth, Mary went to the address Jack provided. When she knocked on the door, she was greeted by a refined and elegant woman. When Mary questioned her, the woman shared everything about her relationship with Mary's father. This revelation shattered Mary's perception of her father, leaving his image in ruins. Since her father had already passed away, Mary decided that the right thing to do was to release the poor old man. However, after she saw Jack off at the airport, her friend, whom she had asked to investigate Jack's identity, finally found some clues. The friend left the documents at Mary's doorstep. When Mary returned home, she found her mother reading the file. Her mother was so shocked by what she saw that she immediately asked Mary why she was looking into this man. According to the documents, Jack had been a notorious criminal 20 years ago. Realizing she might have been deceived by Jack, Mary rushed to the airport. Unfortunately, by the time she arrived, the pilot and security guard had already been killed by Jack. Mary quickly drove back home, only to find her mother lying unconscious in the basement. Before she could react, Jack appeared behind her and knocked her out with a single punch. When Mary regained consciousness, she found herself tied up. It was then that Jack revealed the real truth about what had happened all those years ago. Jack had been jealous of his best friend for marrying Mary's mother, such a beautiful woman. One night during a party, Jack drugged Mary's mother's drink and assaulted her. That was why Mary's father had imprisoned him for 30 years. In a shocking twist, Jack revealed that he was, in fact, Mary's biological father.